Hi everyone, my name is Aaron and welcome back to my channel. For those who may not want to watch a 25 or 30-minute interview, here's a quick summary. Narconon is a Scientology-based drug rehab program. Narconon, by the way, has nothing to do with Narcotics Anonymous. The Narconon program relies very heavily on referrals for new enrollments. Narconon exists under the umbrella of corporate Scientology. And like Scientology, Narconon has always offered a commission-based incentive program to bring in new people. These commission-based incentive programs are based on policies written by L. Ron Hubbard, and as such, Scientologists and staff members of Narconon don't have the power to change these policies. Well, unfortunately for Narconon, about 2 years ago, the federal government made it illegal to pay commissions for referrals to rehabs. Federal authorities are investigating Narconon for violating this new law. This video is for anyone who's worked at a Narconon and has any knowledge of a commission being paid for a referral in the last 2 years. Or anyone who's been to a Narconon in the last 2 years and has knowledge of a commission being paid to whoever referred them to the facility. Or if you yourself have referred someone to a Narconon in the last 2 years and received a commission. Or if you've worked in any Scientology organization and have knowledge of a commission being paid from Narconon to the Scientology organization in the last 2 years. Basically anybody who has any knowledge or information about a commission being paid by a Narconon for a referral in the last 2 years. You can contact me or Luke and we'll refer you to the right person. Additionally, if you were defrauded by the Narconon program, either you personally or a family member, and you want recourse, contact attorney Graham Barry. I'll put his information down below and he can help you. That's the short summary. Here's the full interview with Luke. Hi, Luke. How are you doing?
Hey, good, man. Thanks. How are you?
Good. Why don't you give a quick introduction to everyone about who you are, your role in Narconon, and what you're doing?
Sure. So my name is Lucas Catton. I was a Narconon staff member and field staff member for about 12 years total, including I was the president of Narconon Arrowhead, which was their flagship, largest Narconon center in the United States, in the world, actually. And so after many years of being involved in Narconon and Scientology, I eventually made my exit and became one of the people like you who spoke out in sharing the truths and information of what really transpired.
That's awesome. Is Narconon how you got involved in Scientology in the first place?
Basically, yeah. So my parents had started to get involved in Scientology through a WISE group and gotten into some field auditing and done a little bit of things there. And so I was a 20-year-old kid. I'd gotten pulled over by the police and my parents freaked out. They asked their field auditor, who was a Scientologist, and said, hey, you need to send him to Narconon. So that's what they did. I woke up the next day and they said, you're going to go to Narconon or we're going to have you arrested, basically. And so I was like, all right, I guess I'm going to Narconon. And that was my initial introduction. They had tried to get me involved in Scientology, but it really wasn't until after I went to Narconon and then eventually wound up working with them that's when I really became a Scientologist.
Okay. So for everyone watching who may not already be familiar, Narconon is a rehab program that is based on the works of L. Ron Hubbard. There's a lot of Scientology processes and procedures that are baked into the whole Narconon program. In retrospect, Luke, would you say, because there is some confusion out there as to whether Narconon is Scientology and what exactly that means, would you say the Narconon program is Scientology?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is yes. It's a version of Scientology. So when people graduated Narconon as a program, they could go to a church and do the next step on the bridge. They didn't have to redo the things they did at Narconon. So yes, they were delivering Scientology at Narconon, and they do. So that's part of it. But yet at the same time, it's slightly watered down because they don't use e-meters, for example. But they're still using the same L. Ron Hubbard policy. They're still using the same procedures. And so yeah, it still is Scientology.
Okay, cool. And then this is the questions I'm about to ask aren't really the purpose of our interview, but I think people will find this interesting. Yeah. Is it possible to go through the Narconon program as a patient or a student or whatever term that they use and not become a Scientologist?
Sure. Yeah. In fact, most don't. It is definitely used as a recruiting tool, but to they get out of that by saying, hey, most people don't become Scientologists, and that's true. Most people who go to Narconon do not become Scientologists, but there's enough of it, and that is part of their purpose. That's their position within the entire larger organization, is to forward L. Ron Hubbard's principles and to try and get as many people to become Scientologists as possible. It's part of their clearing the planet agenda.
And is it very common for people to go through the program as, well, what word do you guys use, student or patient? You guys, not you now, but what's the word that's used?
Yeah, they call them students.
Students.
Yeah.
Is it very common for people to go through the program as a student, graduate the program, and then become a staff member?
Yeah, that's the primary source of staff. There had been, as things eventually wound up really getting exposed on a bigger level after a series of deaths and things like that is that one of the biggest downfalls is that in recovery as a whole, there's a lot of people who are, former clients or former patients, et cetera, who develop a passion and purpose to help people. And that's one thing, but to then claim those people are trained and certified staff and counselors and therapists when Scientology and Narconon don't believe in having actual licensed therapists. That's where really some of the heavy deception comes in. And so they would recruit people straight off the program, go through a short training stint and then position them in a place where they're now responsible for someone else's life. And they're not qualified to do so yet.
I've always been familiar with the fact that most Narconon staff members were people who had graduated the program. But the one thing I've never known is it like that in the rest of the rehab industry? Is that common, or is that kind of unique to Narconon, at least to the degree, to the extent that it occurs in Narconon?
Not to that extent. I mean, it's certainly common in the field as far as people wanting to join, but they might be, like a behavioral health tech, which is, sort of like a paraprofessional, or they might take, years to then get an actual counseling certification, or they go back to college and get a bachelor's degree and then a master's degree in psychology, in therapy, and then become a licensed therapist. So it's a long runway before they can actually become, a head of a counseling department at a treatment center. Even if it originally started with their own issues that they were working with. It's not a one day you're a patient, the next day you're a counselor.
Right. You and I both know that in the world of Narconon and the world of Scientology Inc., like actual official churches of Scientology, that there's a lot of overlap. A lot of Scientologists get sent to Narconons, like, well, the example you just gave, kids of Scientologists go to Narconons at the drop of a hat. In fact, Scientologists send their kids to Narconon when they're not even addicts. Like the Scientologist could find their kid is smoking weed and send their kid to full-blown Narconon rehab. The fact is there's a ton of overlap in these worlds. And in the world of Scientology, there is an incentive program, a commission structure that exists to reward people that bring others into Scientology. And it's either 10% or 15% of whatever the person is buying, depending on what they're buying. Mm-hmm. The person who basically got them to buy it gets a commission. And Narconon has historically had the same structure, where if you refer a patient or a student to a Narconon, you can get, well, you tell me, what is the commission structure that Narconon has had in place?
It's usually a flat 10%. So if you refer someone for the program, it's and they pay $30,000, you can submit something called a selection slip, and they will send you a check for $3,000. There is, if they do some kind of training, which is kind of unique to Narconon Arrowhead, but as churches of Scientology do too, if they go for training as opposed to some other service or what they call processing or that kind of thing. But training is a 15% commission.
So this commission structure, the policies, everything in Scientology is based on policies written by L. Ron Hubbard. All of these commissions about the FSM system, which is a field staff member. And I guess for everyone watching, it's called field staff member because the word field in Scientology means the area around a Scientology organization. And the concept behind this term was that L. Ron Hubbard considered that all Scientologists were actually staff members, whether they were officially on staff at the local Church of Scientology or not. And by designating someone a field staff member, it's basically like, yeah, we know you're not actually a staff member, but you still work for us. And your job is to bring people in. And the way you get paid for your job is you get a commission. Everyone you bring in, you get a commission on everything they pay. So that's where this term field staff member comes from. That's why the term FSM is used. It's probably one of the most common terms used in Scientology. It can be a noun, it can be an adjective, it can be a verb. Where I'm going with this is a system that exists based on the policies of L. Ron Hubbard, and Narconon is an extension of the Church of Scientology. I guess they pretend like it's not officially the Church of Scientology. More recently, it actually has become officially part of the Church of Scientology, even though it kind of always was. It has become even more so if we're talking about the organizational structure. Mm-hmm. Again, my point here is that this is a system based on L. Ron Hubbard policy, and you cannot get rid of it. You cannot change L. Ron Hubbard policy in Scientology. You can't change LRH policy in Narconon. The FSM structure that exists in Narconon is exactly the same as the FSM structure that exists in the proper Church of Scientology. And the reason we're talking about all this is why.
So that system of referring people into treatment centers for commission became widely used amongst other treatment centers throughout the country. And it became even more twisted and abused and things like that, to the point where there became a federal law that was passed in October of 2018 called the Eliminating Kickbacks in Recovery Act. And it specifically makes it illegal to either receive a commission or pay a commission for someone going into treatment. And each act is punishable by up to $200,000 fine and or 10 years in prison. So here we have L. Ron Hubbard policy by the Church of Scientology that dictates and runs Narconon centers that is in direct violation of federal law.
So in your time at Narconon, what quantity of the referrals came from either Scientologists or churches of Scientology?
Probably about 20% in terms of like in its heyday. When Narconon was really big, it shrunk considerably since then. But when it was really big, there was a lot of activity on the internet. There was a lot of former staff members that would become FSMs because we could make a lot of money doing so. Honestly, that was one of the things that I did that I had repented for and exposed and things like that too. But so there was a lot of referrals coming from that system. But again, many of them became, like I did, Scientologists as well. So, anywhere from 20%, but referrals as a whole came for probably 50% in many cases where they're paying out, sometimes as much as, $30,000 to $50,000 in commissions in a single week for just Narconon Arrowhead alone, not to mention all the other facilities that existed back then, and some that are still in existence.
Okay, so the idea here is that you and I both believe it is essentially impossible for these FSM commissions to have ceased getting paid to churches of Scientology, maybe even to Scientologists, because it's literally L. Ron Hubbard policy, right?
Right.
So when you were at Narconon Arrowhead, was that just the largest Narconon in the world, or did it have any management function over other Narconons?
That was just the largest. I mean, we did some training, but really Narconon International had a management office across the street from Able International for many years. Narconon International has been dissolved and absorbed by Able International as the trademark holder, now directly run by Sea Org members. But so they really did the management function, but there were really large groups of facilities as well. And back in the early to mid 2000s, up till 2012. And 2012 is when the rise of the income stopped. And that's when the national media hit about a string of deaths at multiple facilities, including Arrowhead. And really the amount of information that became available through dozens and dozens of lawsuits and criminal investigations that for insurance fraud and other things that despite having plenty of evidence, some facilities closed down, like Narconon Georgia closed down. And there's some other ones that are closing. Some just left the network completely. That became other treatment centers that said, screw this, we're not going to have anything to do with this. But the ones that are left are much smaller than they used to be, but they're like the diehards. They're the ones that are run by really dedicated Scientologists who are going to keep pushing their Narconon until somebody steps in and holds them accountable for the laws that they broke.
See, this is where this gets really interesting because, we mentioned earlier that it's possible to go through the Narconon program and not be a Scientologist, and that most of the people who graduate then join staff at the Narconon. And therefore, it is possible to have a Narconon staffed largely by non-Scientologists. And yet, this reorganization that we're talking about that's happened over the last several years has resulted in, well, I'll speak for the one that was here locally in the Clearwater-ish area, Narconon Suncoast. When they relocated and they brought in new management, they cleaned house. They got rid of all the staff members who weren't Scientologists. They gave the people there sort of a chance to get on course and whatnot at Flag. And those who weren't willing were gotten rid of. And so, like you just said, the ones that are left now are more of the hardcore Scientologists. And the reason why that is interesting is because the hardcore Scientologists are going to be the ones most likely to more strictly stick to LRH policy. The ones less likely to care about where the law might override policy. And the reason I think this organizational factor is important is because this paying of FSM commissions, which is now federally illegal, from a Church of Scientology perspective, is strictly an internal matter. Middle management of Scientology has about 5 different divisions. Only one of those divisions is responsible for running churches of Scientology. Another division of middle management is responsible for running the World Institute of Scientology Enterprises, we know it as WISE, or the business consultancy groups that act as a feeder line into Scientology. Another one of the branches of middle management, you alluded to it earlier, is called ABLE, the Association for Better Living and Education. This is a bureau of Scientology middle management staffed exclusively by senior level C organization members. Now, let me ask you a question. So the local center here, I'm going to keep calling it Narconon Suncoast, but if you Google Narconon Clearwater, it might have a new name.
I think it's still Suncoast, yeah.
So the executive director of Narconon Suncoast, to the best of your understanding, reports directly to a Sea Org member at ABLE.
That's my understanding now, yes.
Now, prior to this reorganization, they basically got rid of a cutout. So Narconon International, was staffed by non-Sea Org members, but they were still diehard Scientologists.
Yes.
And then the people at Narconon Int would report to ABLE. For some reason, they got rid of Narconon Int, and now they report directly to ABLE. Do you know why they did that?
I don't know the exact reason. I certainly have my understanding or suspicions of it. One of them is because Narconon Int then takes a cut out of that money. So why would you want a middle organization to then take all of all the Narconon centers pay 10% of their what's called corrected gross income to management as their license fees, and then Narconon International would pay all their staff and then send their money to ABLE. So ABLE goes, well, why are we paying you guys across the street to do things that we've got people that we can pay, $50 a week to do the same thing and collect all the money directly? So I believe that's the real reason. But when Narconon International got disbanded, there was also right after the media storm and all the lawsuits and things like that. So they had opened Narconon Ojai, and many of the Narconon International staff then dispersed, and some went to work at facilities, others went to work for other Scientology companies. And it just kind of silently went away.
That is interesting that after a lot of the controversy surrounding Narconon, you would have expected Scientology to figure out how to even distance itself further from the program, and instead they brought it in closer. I can't say that makes complete sense to me. There must be some piece of the puzzle I'm missing. But what it does do is create a situation where these FSM commissions, like if a Narconon is going to pay a commission to whichever Church of Scientology might have sent them somebody, Scientology would view that as a purely internal matter, and they may not even care at all. In fact, they're not very likely to care at all that this is technically illegal. After all, who's going to be looking at the internal, financial transfers between one Scientology entity to another? I'm curious, do you know if Narconon's tax-exempt status is under the umbrella of Scientology's tax-exempt status?
It's separate. Narconon International got its own tax-exempt status first, actually, before the church did. So many of the centers would go under a group exemption. Since then, several have then gotten their own individual exemption for, like Narconon of Oklahoma used to be fall under Narconon International, but then they filed its own separate corporation and got its own separate tax-exempt status. Narconon Suncoast, I believe, is the same way, and there's several others.
Okay. What is the penalty, if you said it before I missed it, what is the penalty for violating this anti-kickback federal statute?
Up to $200,000 and or 10 years in prison per offense. And
I assume there's got to be some aspect in there of a facility being shut down, or is that just a separate, do you know?
I don't know. I think that would have to be, they'd have to look at the precedent in terms of how widespread it is, that it's systemic. It's not just a few single cases here and there, that it's part of their policy. It's ingrained in their DNA that they must follow this organizational structure and these policies written by Hubbard. And there's another side of that too, is that staff members can't be paid based on their the amount of money they bring in or the number of people they bring in that week, which Scientology is so overly statistical, crazy, that they have everything broken down. Like there was the number of FSM selection slips centered, like how many people were referred that week, how many then commissions were paid out, what's the total amount that was paid out, how many dollars were brought in, how many starts were brought in or admissions, and how much money was each person paid. Like all this is so very detailed down to if somebody just grabs a hold of their basic weekly statistics for the past 130 weeks, let's say, they would find an incredible trove of evidence of them paying staff members based on the money that they're bringing in and all these FSM commissions.
Right. So what we're doing here in this video is basically a call to action to anybody who has anything to do with the world of Narconon. Anybody who has any knowledge of a commission having been paid over the last 2 years. There's even other ways that this can be violated. Like, give me and the viewers an idea of just even an example of what could be an attempt to circumvent that would still be a violation.
Sure. One of them could be, for example, from a church. Let's say a Church of Scientology sent someone in, and if they're aware of the law, in lieu of a direct FSM commission, they then made a donation, quote unquote, to that local church. And so, but it would be tied to a person that was referred that week, and there would be email traffic, indicating that as well, or there would be some kind of report indicating that, or it could be to purchase books or that kind of thing. It could be potentially to do an intervention for someone, or former Narconon graduates who run some intervention services. That may be how they do it. They're saying, well, we'll pay for the intervention costs, quote unquote, but it's really an FSM commission. So there's a few ways that can happen. It's also being able to give them maybe a discount if they refer a family member. They go, oh, well, hey, we'll give you a free program because you referred someone else. So it doesn't have to be a direct check. It could be other ways of swapping out that favor financially.
Let's say I was a public at the Philadelphia Church of Scientology, and I referred someone to a Narconon. It would be possible that the Narconon would make a donation to the Church of Scientology that would show up in the gross income, and that the Church of Scientology could credit me. Let's say the donation was $3,000. That goes to the Church of Scientology. That goes into the gross income. The church could then credit my account for $3,000 of auditing. That's nothing. That's just a matter of, a number in a computer.
Right.
And that would have been the same as if I, the public, had given the Church of Scientology $3,000 for auditing. So it is very possible that the church maybe went to the FSMs and said, okay, you're still going to be compensated, but it's going to happen this way. You can only be compensated in training awards or credit to your account. But even that would be a violation of the law, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So then this call of action goes out not only to people in the Narconon world, but to people in the world of Class 5 orgs in Scientology and even Sea Org orgs in Scientology. Anyone who has any knowledge whatsoever of how Narconons have been paying out FSM commissions over the last 2 years, or how they have been circumventing it. If you know someone who would know anything whatsoever, who should people contact? Should they contact you, and if so, how would they do that?
Sure. Yeah, they can contact me directly. There's a number of different ways. You can go to lucascatton.com if you'd like to. There's another YouTube channel, Narconon Scientology Chronicles, that you can contact me through there if you'd like. You can contact Aaron directly, and he can pass on information through your preferred channels as well. And there's been several states that are already looking into this, where there are existing Narconon centers. And as information continues to mount and evidence grows, then it's really a federal matter. So it should go from there. And this, by the way, is not the first time that Narconon has been on the FBI's radar. Probably another conversation down the road. But I've sat in meetings with insurance fraud investigators and members of the FBI, so they're well aware of the shady tactics. Some of it is just a matter of what is enough to prosecute, because they'll look the other way for a few offenses, but the more information that we can gather is really important.
Right. So let's say someone's watching this video for the first time and they go, well, I don't understand. Why do you guys want to get Narconons shut down? In your opinion, what are the downfalls of the Narconon program? Because certainly people do Narconon and get off drugs. It's happened. What is the problem with Narconon? The problem with Narconon is the failure to admit who they are and what they're doing. If they would simply do that, and I even had conversations with them back when a lot of these lawsuits were coming in and saying, look, just admit that you're a Scientology operation, you're offering a faith-based program to people. That would mean that they would have to stop taking insurance. They would have to do lots of other things. People wouldn't be breathing down their necks about all the lawsuits that they've faced over time, because it would be very plain and obvious what it is. But they continue to deny this and then settle the lawsuits and try and hide information. And so really that's the dangerous, in my opinion, that's the most dangerous part, is that they refuse to be honest about who they are and what they're doing. There's plenty of treatment programs and things like that people may not agree with, or that might not have the safest protocols and sort of things like that, but they're not trying to, in most cases, hide that.
And really, you can open a church-based program down the street and not have to be licensed because you don't have licensed counselors or therapists. And that's really what Narconon is.
Yeah, Narconon is not honest about the certifications and qualifications of the people who work there. I mean,
Right.
that you don't know that you're going to a facility almost completely staffed by people who, as of maybe a week or a month ago, were themselves students in the program, right?
Yeah. I had somebody had reached out just the other day and said, I had gone to a Narconon. I hadn't heard of it before. I thankfully am doing well, but they tried to recruit me to Scientology afterwards. And I didn't even know until the end where they started to give that recruitment pitch. They were sort of oblivious to the whole thing. And they said, it was thankfully that's, they're doing well now. They're at a point in their lives where they want to keep doing what they're doing. But also, thank God they dodged the bullet of getting sucked into the entire, system.
Right. So if anyone does have information, they can send it to me at growingupinscientology@gmail.com. Sorry, it's such a long email address. You can also send it to me on Facebook. You can find me, Aaron Smith-Levin, on Facebook or Instagram. You can also comment. I see all the comments in the video down below. If they want to reach you, Luke, what's the best way to do that?
You can send an email, lucas@lucascatton.com. That'd be probably the most direct way.
Okay, great. Do you think we've covered it all? Is there anything else that we've left off?
If somebody has information and they're worried about their own implication, I'm in a position to approach investigators and try and pre-negotiate, some air cover on your behalf if you're worried about getting in trouble, because they're more worried about the systemic violations than any one individual. So don't let that deter you in terms of turning over evidence.
Great. And there is one other thing I should add, which is attorney Graham Barry has been very successful recently in helping families get refunds from Narconon Fresh Start programs who feel defrauded by the registration and recruitment processes, where they pay 30 grand for a family member to go to the Narconon, for this Narconon program. The person shows up and they're shocked to find that it's staffed by unqualified people, and it's based on a program and a curriculum that's almost completely based in Scientology, and that the recruitment system was dishonest, and so there was an element of fraud. And so even though someone might be watching this and they may not know anything about the commissions being paid, if someone feels like they've been defrauded by the Narconon program, contact me as well, and I'll refer you to Attorney Graham Barry, and I'll try to put his contact information down below. So, all right, that probably covers it. If we think of anything else, we'll do a follow-up. And thank you, Luke. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you. I appreciate it too.
For everyone who watched the whole interview, thank you very much. Please share this video with anyone you know who's had anything to do with Narconon or anything to do with the Church of Scientology. I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. That's all for now. I'll talk to you again soon. Bye.
Okay, if you want to see my rock and roll songs, click right on this guitar. And if you want to see a different one of my videos, then you could click right inside here. If you have subscribed or not, subscribe